head of the BRICS Expert Council and vice rector of the Higher School of Economics in Russia. And last but not least, our moderator, Balázs Darnok, research director at the John Lukács Institute for Strategy and Politics at the Ludovika University of Public Service right here in Budapest.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. It is my great honor to serve you as moderator in today's discussion titled From Hegemony to Harmony, Navigating the New Multipolar Maze. It's a privilege to have discussion with such distinguished colleagues from very diverse regions, representing very probably different perspectives on a very important and timely matter, which is the actual transformation of these shifts defining our global world order. We are witnessing, as it has been said, a recalibration of global power dynamics. We see that the Western-centric order that dominated the past Cold War era is now facing tremendous challenges. Those traditional governance frameworks, norms, and institutions that were designated a very different time are now struggling to keep up with the pace of the rapid rise of new powers and evolving geopolitical realities. This shift is not just about the redistribution of power, but also about how states and regions to choose to cooperate or even to compete. One would argue that the emerging multipolar world is characterized by several strong regional actors besides the leading power, the United States, China, India, Russia, or Europe. Meanwhile, the global south is seeking a more pragmatic, interest-based, and less ideological alignments. This evolving order presents tremendous opportunities, but also poses certain risks. On the one hand, multipolarity can foster pluralism, allowing greater diversity, but on the other hand, this may pose fragmentation, transactional geopolitics, and weakening of the collective mechanisms. A critical question is what we are going to be addressing in this panel discussion, where we face that this shift will lead to a more balanced and cooperative world, or whether it will lead to a more deepened division, rivalries, and the emergence of certain chaotic system of managed multipolarity. Our discussion today will explore these themes with our four distinguished experts that have already been mentioned. And let me introduce and propose the time frame for the discussion. After this introduction, we will have questions, round of questions, aim-free round of questions in the length of 60 to 65 minutes, and then in the remaining 10 to 15 minutes we will open the floor to the question from the audience. Regarding the first question, and the first question shall be the same for each panelist. Are we truly entering a multipolar world with several strong regional powers, or is there a global order evolving toward two dynamic blocks? I invite our panelists to share their views, and also complementary questions. Minister Szijjártó said that Hungary does not want the blocks to emerge in the world. Do you see the blocks avoidable in this new emerging world order? Please.
Thank you so much for that excellent question, and also to the Hungarian Institute, our partners, for hosting the Budapest Global Dialogue. It's an honor being here, and I've been enjoying my time in Budapest. You know, the lovely architecture of the city is mind-boggling. And I use architecture also in a symbolic sense. Because answer to your question, whether we are going into a multipolar world or a bipolar world between the West and the global South? If you ask me, the answer is no, neither, to both those questions. We are not in a situation where we are either moving into a stable multipolar world, nor a world which can be defined as bipolar, or for that matter, a tripolar world with US, China, Russia, three poles on the one side, and the rest of the world being carved out into spheres of influence amongst these three nations with trade and technology wars and all kinds of wars amongst them. So it's a more difficult situation. But what we are witnessing is something more fundamental. What we are witnessing is a slow and rather painful unraveling of the architecture of a rules-based international order set up after the debris of the Second World War. That is what we are witnessing, and it is extremely painful to do so. And the reasons for that unraveling, unfortunately, the reasons for that unraveling are structural. Let us please understand. This is not something which is a passing phase. That question was raised yesterday. This is not a passing phase. This is something which is here to stay. This is permanent. And the politics you are seeing across parts of the West is the consequence. It is not the cause of what we are seeing before us. So let us first understand that. And what are these structural problems? If you ask me to define these structural problems, I will say that the first world is experiencing for the first time third world problems and does not know how to react to them. You look around you, look at the streets of Los Angeles, look at the streets of Paris, look at the streets of London. Those are third world streets now. We are very familiar with that. We've been in that place. So, we are not breaking up into blocks. We are actually coming together. We probably are in a situation where we need to understand each other and are in a position where we understand and can understand each other far better than we have done any time since the Second World War. So, no, we are not moving to blocks. And in this situation, let me expand it further, you see. Why do I say that? How did we get here? We've seen, 2 decades of spiraling debt. The debt burden rising in the developed economies. You got into all kinds of programs and fights to get over that debt, the debt crisis which occurred in 2008. What was the solution we found? See, the seeds of the crisis had started showing by 2004. It was not 2008. By 2004, the fires had started burning of the mortgage crisis. And instead of bringing a water hose to the problem, what you brought in was a flamethrower and fanned the flames. The answer to debt became more debt, lower interest rates, negative interest rates, and the spiral kept on increasing. The spiral kept on increasing in a way where you started saying, oh, you don't need to save, you need to spend. Take debt, take money, spend more. So you get into a cycle where you are consuming without producing, financing without regulating. That is what primarily happened. Today we call it deindustrialization, but that is what it was. Consuming without producing, that is deindustrialization. That is why we have reached today. Now, had this happened in any third world country, the high priests of the IMF would have been there with their Bible, and the Bible was called Structural Adjustment Programs. And the Bible came with penance, fasting, sackcloth, hard decisions. You cut down spending, you cut down, you start cutting down people's pensions, you incite all kinds of economic and financial troubles. Instead, what happened in the developed West was something different. They rewarded themselves with forbearance. And the reward was, yes, go into a spiral of lowering interest rates, throw more money at the problem, then comes COVID, and the answer is the same. You start bringing in more flamethrowers. And there begins this whole cycle of something called quantitative easing, which all the yellow papers and the economic and financial papers, the rhetoric, kept on saying, oh, great thing, we are getting out of this, we'll find a way out of it. The problem gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So that is why we have reached where we reached. Now, what are the ways out? What was missing in all this were actually parallel investments in far deeper structural reform and productivity gains. That is what should have been done at the point of time. Those decisions never got taken because it was far easier to kick the can down the road. So today, when we start looking at the larger situation, when we start looking at how we react, how the world is reacting to the current crisis, we have become transactional. Our politics has become transactional. And there are deep divisions within the politics of the West. The kind of polarization you're seeing. So you're gradually becoming less cohesive as societies. Now that is where I say, these are third world problems. And the answers to these third world problems are actually also third world answers. You today have the CHIPS Act, you have the CBAM, you have governments intervening, free markets are history. No, they're always governments today intervene. Well, this has been happening in our countries for the last 70, 80 years. Governments intervened, gave all kinds of subsidies. They came in and had these kinds of programs. We wanted to industrialize, protect their industries. This has been happening. It was considered wrong at that time. Today, no one considers it wrong. So that's where I say, this is not the time to get into divisions and bifurcations and poles. This is the time to sit down and try and understand each other. We are all today coming from the same place, and we all need to sit down together. And there are no pariahs in this. We need to have conversations with everybody. There are reasons, there are security concerns of nations which need to be addressed, and need to be addressed honestly. So the idea is to get to talk to each other, not against each other. Work with each other and not against each other.
Thank you, Sanjay. Arta, the same question.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And a lot of the things that my colleague to the right just mentioned, I agree with. And the Foreign Minister Siarto, his speech was really, I think, marking this kind of new world that we are shifting towards. We are in the midst of the Great Transition. That Great Transition is moving away from a world of rules, a world of liberal values, a world of universalism, a world of Western concepts, to something different. Now, this world was created in the aftermath of World War II, and it had two specific elements, and we often kind of mix these two together. There is the order, and then there is the system. And when we think about this kind of what's going to follow this unraveling, we need to sort of separate the two, because if we don't do that, then we're going to think about sort of how, we're going to confuse topics, and we're going to think about multipolarity. Is it real or not? So the concepts are always important to define. The order is always sort of man-made. It's normative. So when we talk about the liberal international order, the law, the way that we navigate this world, all of that is a response to a specific structure of power that exists prior to the normative elements. And that order is unraveling because the power structure underneath it is also unraveling. So we are moving away from that unipolar moment of American hegemony, but we're also moving away. We also moved away from the Cold War period. So, but both those worlds, to me, both those power structures were anomalous. They were aberrations in history. They were highly ahistorical. And now we are moving and returning to history and to the ways that human history and statecraft has functioned for a long time. And that's by re-emphasizing, recentering regions, recentering civilizations or cultural dynamics, and moving therefore towards something that our generation and the generations past since World War II has not really contemplated, even since 19th century. We have emphasized the global element. in almost every scenario, whether liberal, realist, from the East, from the West, from any kind of dynamic, we think in global terms. Global is in a way a reification. It doesn't exist. We live in local circumstances under specific particular cultures. So moving forward towards understanding this new kind of world requires a post-global perspective. And that doesn't mean a nationalist perspective. The nation is a constituent element of the international order. It's in the name. So moving truly towards a post-global order requires something different, which is post-global in the sense that it's civilizational, cultural, and particular. So in that sense, we are seeing, to go back to your question, we are moving towards a more multiple order. Or multiple systems that then beget an order that sort of comes out, which is less formal. And yet we think about rules and laws and formalities because we're used to it. So the question now is, how do we navigate this change? Sort of a world of multiplicity, global cultural pluralism, it does not mean necessarily a world of United Nations coming together and being all at peace. But it doesn't mean a world of chaos. We are returning to a world of anarchy that always existed. This anarchy was sort of papered over by the global hegemony of first two superpowers and then one. And both of them are now sort of having to take a step back. I mean, one already did. The second one is now unraveling. So we will see a different kind of order emerging from this. And it's highly dependent on what, as I said, all politics, all statecraft is local and domestic. So how do the people who are going to make those orders react to the systemic and global trends that we are witnessing? And I'll just say one thing and end on that. And based on the fact that, all of the order that we are talking about is highly, highly ideological. It was representing a kind of a world view that was the Western world view. So moving away from that means moving away from ideology, liberal ideology, but also other kinds of ideology, and moving towards something that's far more grounded in realism, reality, and concrete structures that exist within regions and bounded geographies. And again, when I use the word culture and civilizations, I want to emphasize that I'm not using it in a very abstract sense like Samuel Huntington. I'm using it in very concrete, bounded ways in which a civilization or a culture is something defensible because of the way that it has historically evolved, it has a specific population, but it is geographically located. So it's not this sort of abstract concept like the Judeo-Christian civilization, which is not bounded to any specific geographical terrain, or it doesn't have a specific topography, or it includes so many different languages and people. It is specifically, when we're talking about the return of cultures and civilization, we're talking about a world of some specific powers and a new kind of hierarchy of powers, and therefore a coming of a spheres rather than blocks. Also.
Thank you, Arta. Sebastian, what is your take on that?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Tarnok. Thanks first to the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs, of course, and the Observer Research Foundation from India, a country I really like, a strong, powerful, smart, and spiritual country. Sometimes we miss a bit of spirituality to analyze international relation. What is very interesting already, which was said, I would just tell some elements, because when you teach international relations or geopolitics, of course all your students are asking every day what's happening, and sometimes you don't know what's happening. Or sometimes you try to understand the way that world is ruled and the way that all the alliance or all the organizations are trying to be adapted or are trying to see and sometimes predict the future. Of course, in geopolitics, it's very, very difficult. I come from Belgium. I'm French and Belgian, by the way. And of course, I represent, maybe with Tarnok, the whole continent. this continent, which sometimes seems to be more and more disconnected from what's happening in the world. We spoke a lot in the last years of the way that finally there was a kind of de-Westernalization of the world. And I think that Western countries, of course, were very afraid of that. And as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said before, I think that with the return of Trump, something different is now happening. I wouldn't say that we are on the way to the return of a jungle law, but it's clear that international organizations we were facing for decades now are totally changing and are losing more and more power. It means that the return of the state is very important in this new multipolar maze, in this big, let's say, chaos or mess for the moment. But I think that finally citizens are firstly expecting more from the state than from the international organization. There is a kind of satellisation as well of the Western world, and now we have to deal with other countries or other powers or other continents who want to play a real role in the world. And I think that Western countries, especially European ones, especially ones from Brussels, still think that they represent a lot in the world. But we'll speak a bit later about Europe. Europe is more and more isolated in this big concert of nation. So I think that there is a strong movement of powers would change now in the world. Yesterday it was very interesting to listen to Mr. Saran. We were speaking about three strong poles of power in the world. And I was thinking, okay, United States, okay, China, but who's the third one? And of course, it was not Europe. It's more and more India. It means that now Europe is trying to struggle to exist. But the problem is that in this big game, in this big changing world, how can Europe be a strong power? That is a real question. If we don't want to become like the Titanic, we see the iceberg coming, but we're going. Of course, we have to integrate all the other countries who expect to be leaders in the world. And I think that Donald Trump and United States have understood something very important. Of course, the art of deal, well, it's not always successful. It takes time sometimes. We can see it with Ukraine and Russia, but we can see it as well with Iran, Gaza, and Israel. But sometimes the way that Europeans want to still remain these leaders of the world, they were a long time ago. They have probably to understand that now there is this return of the common sense, but of course of the real politic. I think that we probably forgot for ages the fact that it's very important to have a direct dialogue between countries, and that's exactly what's happening now. I don't know how these kind of agreements can last and what's the strength of these kind of agreements if they occur, but what is clear is that now United Nations, NATO, just look at NATO, it was nothing before the war. Remember what Emmanuel Macron, our French president, well, my French president, was saying when he was saying that NATO was mentally dead. Everything changed, thanks to Russia, finally. But if you see the other organization, if you see the other cities or symbolic capitals of multilateralism, they are now all disappearing. Look at New York United Nations headquarters. When was the last declaration of Antonio Guterres? And at least who is listening to him now? It's the same with Brussels. You can, of course, listen to Ursula von der Leyen or Costa, but there is not a real big consequences, or there is not a big positive consequences for Europe, because they try to exist against everyone, because they have problem to build their own identity and to exist by themselves like that. And look at Geneva, for example, and we finish by that. Geneva was the capital of multilateralism. In 1920, there was the creation of the famous Société des Nations, which didn't prevent from the Second World War. Now, United Nations cannot be able to resolve conflicts, and they cannot even be able to prevent conflicts. So it's clear that now it's the return of the state, it's the return of regional powers. In each continent now you have a strong power and a strong country who try to deal with the regional issues, with the regional wars, and who become more and more this kind of new mediators who are dealing now with the crisis or the wars issues. I think that's exactly what I wanted to say. So we are in a period of transition. Chaos, I don't know, but sometimes people think that from chaos you have amazing things which happen. What is clear is that now Western world cannot do as if all the other countries from global south with S exist. Now everyone has to be an actor of the international relation. I think that probably 75% of the world was just a spectator for too much time and for too long period. Now everything is changing.
Thank you, Sébastien. Victoria.
First of all, allow me to thank both OIRF and Hungarian Institute of International Affairs for inviting me here. And I always enjoy thorough events Samir is organizing all over the world, in fact. And this way it makes, I think it's not a question who is another important pole in the world, because OIRF, I think, is ahead of anybody else nowadays in terms of projecting its soft power, not just by yoga or something else that is associated with India, but by promoting international discussion throughout the world with their neutrality and, but at the same time passion that is attributed and is part of Indian culture. So if you look at what are we witnessing today. So, of course, by all means, I would agree with all the previous speakers that hegemony and their one-polar world is already a history. There's been discussions of the kind since the time the Soviet Union broke apart, since the end of the Yalta-Potsdam system of the kind. There's been chaos, but what we saw rising Global South, rising Asia, rising Africa, Latin America. And this way, we're seeing that countries of the Global South and East, or we like to call it global majority, they no longer act just in a way that was from their, Cold War times of their non-aligned movement. It's not about NAM any longer, because NAM was about moral leadership, but it didn't have material basis under that. Nowadays, those countries have risen well above. And if you look at just Global South and East, it is said that by 2030, non-OECD countries' economies would account for about 57% of global economic share. And just two countries, China and India, will account for 36% of global population and about a quarter of the global GDP as well. If you look at, I think one of the biggest manifestations of how the global South and East are organizing themselves nowadays is the BRICS. And that is why, if you look, despite difficulties, let's say, of communication with China, right? Because China and one of their suggestions that we heard yesterday that there could be still two poles led by US and China, and with India being more attracted to the Western pole. But I would say India nowadays, as well as other global southern countries, are too strong to be attracted to either of the poles. They have a voice of their own. And that is why I mentioned BRICS. That is why, despite difficulties, be it with China-America competition, be it with sanctions against Russia, be it with Iranian issues, we see more than 30 countries that are willing to join the bloc. It grew twice as big over the years of 23-24. Indonesia, the largest Muslim country, the big, important member of ASEAN, joined as of January 25. And Vietnam recently announced that it's also becoming the partner country for BRICS. So 10 member countries plus Saudi Arabia with their unclear status, invited but not fully participating, but not willing to say that they're not part of it. And 10 partner countries. So, and many more are in fact trying to be part of the game. And it is interesting because BRICS could be serving as a model for the new world. And this way, neither Europe would be isolated, as you said. US could find its place. Why I say so is that because the principle in BRICS is not about dictate. You're not saying, okay, you should do that, you should cross your red line, otherwise we will sanction you. It is fully consensus-based model, fully having in mind that each country has its own sovereign interests, has its own traditions, and has its own history. And it's not just about material base. It's about diversity versus universalism. Because, yes, our language is also English. We don't go, the language of BRICS is English. But each country brings its own national identity into it. Remember Indian G20 slogan, and it was about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one future. It's an important part of Indian philosophy, and it is accepted by the BRICS members as an important way forward. Or look at South Africa, who is presiding in G20 nowadays. Ubuntu. I am because you are. Each country in BRICS, and each country that is striving to become part of their grouping, they're not trying to go and achieve a hegemony, although I know that many of the Western observers, since the very start of the BRICS itself in 2009, the first summit, meetings were before as well, they always regarded it as a threat, but it's not, because BRICS is not challenging. It is not revolutionizing. It is suggesting how we could be talking it to each other without making you heard, without undermining your dignity, but also not undermining our own dignity. It is an important way to go forward. And I think this is the only way how we could be saving our world from the flames, from the turbulence that we're seeing nowadays around the world, where the different, like the two major conflicts of the world were named already, but there are many more, and they're growing in number. So we have to learn, and there is something to learn from BRICS. Listen to each other and do not humiliate each other. It's consensus. Then we'll be moving ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. I've seen some consensus on the merit that our world order is changing, and you all emphasize the relevance of regions. You said that the regions are re-emerging to this new system, so I would suggest let's dive into the specific regions where you came from. First, let's turn to India. Several of the speakers emphasized that India is the new rising great power. What is India's goal regarding the change of the new world order? What does India want to preserve, and what does India want to reform in the new order? And how in this new order India sees those alignments, coalitions like BRICS or the Global South?
Thank you, Tanok, for the question. Let me just give a roundup of where we reached so far. I think the panel has more or less come to the conclusion that today's world is neither bipolar nor multipolar. Actually, truly speaking, power is dispersed. It is extremely amorphous. You are living in not a multipolar world, you are living in a multinodal world, where power resides in various power centers. And this multinodal world is poly-crisis driven. There are lots of crises all around. And if it is so poly-crisis driven, the response is that it has become transactional. Now, transactions are a short-term response to a crisis. Transactions are not a long-term response to a crisis which is engulfing everybody. And in this world, if you start looking at India, and I would speak of India in the context of the Global South. I mean, lots of hopes have been placed upon India, and I would say that being an interlocutor in this kind of situation is not a luxury, it is a burden. It's a very, very difficult burden. And India is modest enough to acknowledge the weight of that burden, first of all. So India does not, when we start thinking about the West and the rest, India does not want to lie as a bridge between the West and the rest. It is a bridge, but as a bridge, as an interlocutor, it is about being what comes next, not about West and the rest. And next is where the West and the rest, including India, can get together on common ground. That's primarily the point which I'm trying to make. And what is the new model? When you start talking of Victoria, Victoria spoke about it, Moin spoke about it, civilizational values. What are the civilizational values? Civilizational values are primarily about saying that you cannot repeat the models of prosperity that the West has taken up. You can't build Wall Streets in every capital in the world. It does not work that way. You will end up down the same road where we did, on spreadsheet wealth, which ultimately creates inequality. You need, the big fight in the Global South is against not other people. The big fight is against poverty. The war is against poverty. That needs to be eradicated. That is priority number one. And to deliver those answers, we need to have a prosperity. That prosperity has to come with equity. Equity, whether it is on climate, equity on every other possible equation where you start talking of growth and development. And therefore, India, as a civilizational power, really stands, what does it stand for? The 3 R's: rebalance, reorder, and rebuild. This is not about burning the house down, to say that the existing system has become completely irrelevant. There are parts of us, parts of it, which need to be preserved and be carried forward. And what are those parts? Well, those parts are basically the norms of sovereignty. They need to be carried forward. The spirit of multilateralism. And with that, the far more important but extremely dented spirit of cooperation. These 3 things in the present system need to be carried forward. There's no need to burn the house down. Yeah, we may need to evict some absentee landlords who have given up their responsibilities. Because to be leaders, to command positions, you need to lead by example, not rule by legacy, as Sebastian said. You cannot rule by legacy. You have to lead by example. And unfortunately, that is where Europe has lost leadership. It wants to go on ruling by legacy. Now, we need to rebuild this house and possibly rebuild it in the spirit of the Indian joint family. It is not that the joint family will not have squabbles. They will still have squabbles. They will have fights. They'll have disputes. There'll be disagreements. But when there's a disagreement, someone always comes in to douse the flames, not to bring a flamethrower and exacerbate them, as seems to be happening in Europe, or which seems to be happening in West Asia. You do not throw a flamethrower at a problem which is becoming severe, and that is the way of certain and unmitigated disaster lying ahead. So that is primarily, as a civilization, where India wants to go. And rebalancing is about, yes, finding that middle ground, finding that middle path. It is about not treating these problems in completely binary terms of us versus them, but sitting down and getting together to find those new pathways which can get together. And this holds for security, that holds for larger issues dealing about how we're going to deal with technology, how we're going to deal with the global commons. There are a whole host of issues which need to be addressed together. Yes, technology may have some of the answers to many of the solutions, but technology also becomes a problem. We need to then move towards a more, what would say, a human-centric order. No, it is not about, when we start talking about digital sovereignty, what does digital sovereignty mean for that matter? What does it mean for billions of people across the globe of getting over the digital divide? It cannot be about copying China's firewalls or emulating America's algorithmic monopolies. There is, again, a middle path which needs to be found there. So that is what I would like to say, that we do not actually bring people together to transact, to seek concessions, but to forge real coalitions on issue-based reforms, and that is what the G20 was all about, to get together to create a consensus. Today, the G7 has just concluded. There's no joint statement coming out of the G7. Maybe in some ways, it is a good idea, because the G7 had actually become a comfort club. The BRICS, the great thing about BRICS, which Victoria mentioned, is that for all its differences, the BRICS is not a comfort club. And the BRICS has differences. Those are acknowledged. And we talk about them. So getting into these different formats of negotiation is what is going to be important. That is actually what India proposes.
Thank you, Sanjay. Arta, the US won the Cold War, became a hegemon, but now the US is facing adversaries, global adversaries like China. How does the US and its foreign policy wants to maintain its influence amid regional conflicts, emerging regional conflicts, not to talk about the Middle East, but generally in a global scene? Does the US want to maintain its global leading power status?
So I think the US is very confused, because what we have to understand again is that there are global systemic trends that we just spoke about, and then there are people who are supposed to implement the changes that adapt to the kind of new world that is shaping. And so a lot of those people are the people who came of age during the Cold War and the unipolar moment. So it is very hard for a lot of our policymakers, both under, and this is not about Donald Trump or Joe Biden, it's a systemic or structural issue in America, to make sense of the fact that American power, in order for it to withstand for the future and continue to be a great power, which is, as an American, all of us, we would want that. But in order to manage that, to mitigate that change, our global footprint has to be reduced drastically. And there are many regions that we need to pull back from. And yet instead we are seeing more and more sort of equivocation when it comes to actual retrenchment, actual change. And this doesn't mean isolationism. It just means that we accept and understand pragmatically that there are various, basically each region is a world unto itself, and our interference and our intervention in those regions is against American national interest. America, for example, has no interest in the Middle East today, but it's involved increasingly in a war that could raise itself to World War III. What is it that a country with $37 trillion of debt wants to get itself into another quagmire in the Middle East with a much bigger country now than Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen? So these kinds of decisions are fundamentally emanating not from a physical security environment, which we are often thinking about. Iran does not have, for example, an existential threat to the United States. Even a nuclear Iran doesn't. So what is it that we want to accomplish in these regions? Or Russia, for example, does not have an existential threat to the United States. All of this is the ontological insecurity, the even psychological insecurity of elites in the United States that have felt for a long time that they need to do or say what they want and get their way. And now, in the midst of the uncertainty we just talked about, in the midst of the rise of the multinodal world that we have just discussed, and I was going to bring up that we actually live in a multinodal world. We have to think through the question of poles and think through the regions and nodes. So in this kind of world, what should we do as the United States? Well, it's very clear what we should do. And in fact, Donald Trump got elected because the majority of Americans agreed with his vision for peace, diplomacy, and staying away from most conflict within regions of the world, unless there is an actual interest of the United States, which is closer home. So that kind of meant American sphere doctrine, or something that is, closer to the northwestern hemisphere. But going back to Central Europe, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, does not account to those changes, does not gel well. So we need to figure out why that is. And my explanation is that we think about rationality in very material terms. This is our interest, but ultimately, a lot of the people who are supposed to implement and create the grand strategy are themselves humans involved in sort of ontological and even phenomenological sort of thinking. They are projecting their biases and their ideologies and their own sense of idealism, their own sense of self, their own beliefs about institutions and their role in the world onto the systemic changes which they don't necessarily understand or want to grapple with. So I am of the view that we are not navigating as Americans these global trends quite well, but ultimately we will have to. And this is what the change between the system and the order is. In order for a great power has much more leeway, more time to be able to make mistakes, but that is not infinite. And so at some point, we need to pay the bill for all of these adventurism. And at that point, we will see a kind of a more retrenched foreign policy. But this kind of chaos that we are seeing in these regions, a lot of it is self-inflicted. It's the class and elite-based class of the United States or the liberal international order that do not want to confront and let alone accept or affirm the reality of regions and civilizations, and instead they're trying to do a sort of a last dance, a sort of last swan song for the liberal international order. The result is almost all of these conflicts are with countries that are civilizational. Russia with Ukraine, Iran with Israel. So again, and we may see more of that, but it's highly, highly destructive and dangerous. But that will actually accelerate the unraveling of the order and generate more chaos in the meantime.
Thank you, Arta. Sebastian, you mentioned Europe's role in the emerging world order, and you promised to get back to that. So how do you see Europe's role in this new system? Does Europe have the place at the table, as it has been said? And a fundamental question, what do we mean Europe? Do we mean the European Union or European political community or European regions? And another question, how the Russian-Ukrainian war influenced Europe's unity in your view?
All of that in a few minutes, I guess. Thanks for the questions. Questions like Europe and Europe's. The issue of the independence of Europe and the way that Europe is looking at the world is for me, I think, a real issue and a real problem. This is a $1 billion question. How can Europe be independent? How can she solve problems and crises close to her borders, like the Russia and Ukraine war? The problem of Europe is that it's a kind of union in disunion. And I think that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who spoke before really emphasized one thing, is that there is the European Union, of course, institutions, Brussels, like we call it here, and there is Europe. And I think that one of the problems of Europe's fathers is the way that they pushed people to create or invent a kind of feeling or a kind of identity to be European. What does European mean? It's very difficult. It's very difficult now to know what's the connection between people from Baltic states and Portugal, for example. So I think that now, in this big changing world, some countries really want to strengthen their own identity and defend it against Brussels. But the problem of European Union is that she is now struggling for her own sovereignty, identity, and all of that against the other countries in the world or against the other poles of influence or leadership. And I think that's one of the main problems of Europe now, is that she's not living by herself, but she's living, or she's trying to live against the others. When you are in Brussels now, you have to deal with the American issue and the issue of the return of Donald Trump. You can imagine that, of course, there is not only Ursula von der Leyen who has troubles to sleep, actually now, but many Europeans just don't want to hear about Donald Trump, who is just the bad guy, and that's it. Nobody is going further that, trying to understand what does defending its own country mean. I think that Europe spent her time giving lessons and trying to preserve all these common values, but now it's very difficult to even know if we have real common values. Because the way that Europe decided to support Ukraine, I mean, why not, for security reasons and all that? But this choice, if it's the European choice, the choice for what we call in Brussels liberty, freedom and all that, maybe that for our own independence, if it was the first obsession of Europeans since the collapsing of the European Community of Defense in 1954, maybe we should have saved a part of this money to build this famous common defense to become independent, because now we look like probably this kind of son with rich parents, was a great car, was a great iPhone, but then the parents say, oh no, we want to stop money because you don't respect the rules, or you just have to live by yourself. And that's now what's happening with the American promise of withdrawal or pullback. What do Europeans look like now if Americans decide to leave NATO, for example, for the security of Europe? That's a real problem, because now we don't have a single penny for that. Look at the debt of France, it's just awful. We don't have money to protect ourselves. So I think that there are so many issues regarding this, the isolation of Europe, probably this kind of complex of superiority who cannot work anymore in the world we are facing now. And I think that Europe, spending time giving lessons, even didn't respect the rules of NATO. When you see some countries like Poland, for example, Hungary and all the other, they decided to invest in defense. Poland is a great example. But if you look at the other, they are all under the famous level of 5% of the GDP consecrated to defense. We didn't respect the rules we fixed, and that's sometimes the problem of Western world and of Europe. We don't respect the rules we fixed, and then after we're asking to the others to do it. So I think to finish that, I would say that Europe used to be a great success after the end of the Second World War. It became an area of prosperity. The biggest area of economical and business exchange. But now even this is very touchy, even this is very difficult for European. And now European is facing the eternal issue of becoming a political leader. And I think that that's the real problem. With all the countries, with the diversity, with some countries which look to the south of Europe, with others to look to the east of Europe, and with the others who look outside of Europe, I really don't know how we are going to deal with this issue, but I hope that Europe will be saved, but it's, for me, really, really difficult at that point.
Thank you, Sebastian. Victoria, what capabilities Russia have to influence or shape the new world order? How does the Russian-Ukrainian war influence this? And Russia tries to shape the new order independently or through coalitions like BRICS?
Okay, so Russia is definitely one of the poles now, and but it would never be trying to, let's say, and is not trying to impose or establish the rules that are not, let's say, supported by the others. If you look at BRICS, because a lot what is done in Russian foreign policy is through BRICS, SCO, etc. But what is important about it, that all the main foreign policy concepts that are ingrained in Russian thinking are, in a way, brought out through BRICS. So it's UN centrality, it stays the same, so BRICS is not trying to compete with the United Nations. It's the equality and, dialogue as an important issue. It's consensus-based and based on interests and common security for all, not building somebody's security at the expense of the others. This is also key, and within BRICS, we have several countries that are not quite, let's say, properly with each other established. So it means that there are like certain conflicts between India, China, there are certain conflicts between Iran and Emirates, Ethiopia and Egypt. But it doesn't stop the association from communication with each other. Naming India and China, they were the founders. They were from the very start in BRICS. And at the same time, we were able, and they were able to rise above, certain problems that they had, like border issue, and achieve something that is more important for their general well-being, for their economic development, for their social prosperity, because BRICS is bringing that. And that is why I should say that it is probably the best platform where Russia is able to nowadays build or be part of their big family foundation to build the world that would be acceptable to all countries. And it is very important because we all could be having divergent issues. We do not agree on everything in BRICS. we have heated discussions on a number of issues on all tracks. But so far, while BRICS exists within their limits and frameworks of their established Western world, it still managed to come up with some solutions. And they gradually, sometimes very slowly, but gradually they're bringing fruits. Look at NDB, the New Development Bank. We came up with the idea just a couple years before it was established and agreed by the leaders in 2014. And I think nowadays yes, it does exist within their rules of the Bretton Woods banks and systems. But non-conditionality is what attracts to it the countries of the Global South. And so far, I think we have about over 35 billion US dollars used for projects in NDB countries. And what is important, they're all for investment infrastructure. And once again, it's not against World Bank. It's complementary, but it's addressing the key problems the country is having in their social domain. And this is what BRICS is about. BRICS is also bringing positive agenda. You mentioned the G7, which just, the biggest information issue was that Trump left earlier. But otherwise, over the past years that I've been watching clubs, the G7 was more about negative agenda, what they're against, not what they are for. BRICS is about positive agenda. As everybody knows, India has very good relations with the West. China, Russia has different relations with the West. It's not that much pushed or brought up as a point of discussion there. We're talking about issues that are important for our common development. Apart from NDB, there is CRA, Contingency Reserve Arrangement, which is able to guarantee, in case of default, their member countries with their pool of reserves. With the NDB, by the way, we are more and more using national currencies, not just US dollar. Now it's the main currency, but national currencies are expected to reach about 30% of the projects. We're having the BRICS Network University that is providing for more diversity and more cultural and education exposure for our countries, but countries outside BRICS as well. STI architecture. So far, I believe there were about 60 projects supported along 10 main breakthrough scientific areas in STI. So I think this is where we should be starting from. If you concentrate on positive agenda, on how to not to concentrate on zero-sum game, okay, I will only be happy if the other one is unhappy. We're trying to find their equilibrium. We are winning, and it doesn't matter much what are the relative gains. If there are gains, that's good. And I think this could be the only foundation for cooperation, and that's what we're trying to promote.
Thank you. Before opening the floor for the audience questions, I would have one more last round with quick, probably 1 or 2 minutes answers. Sanjoy, you mentioned that the BRICS is not a comfort club. How do you guys deal with China over your disputes? What is the modus vivendi to go forward?
Yeah, the way we deal with China is very much part of the larger structure which I described. India, culturally, civilizationally, has always stood for what is the big question about strategic non-alignment, the strategic autonomy. In the old days, in Indian politics, we keep bickering about it, but right from the times of the 50s, when India stood between the parties of the Cold War, and took up non-alignment as the answer, to multi-alignment today, the concept has been the same. We do not treat the two sides as black and white. We see both black and white, a mixture on both sides. We're all human. We all have good and evil inherent in us. No one is pure. Okay? So that is primarily what we believe in. And with China also, the situation is the same. The stakes are much higher now today. Why are the stakes higher? See, with China, it is no longer, I would say, a kind of civilizational dance. There is definitely rivalry. And what is this rivalry? We share a contested border. Everybody knows it. We diverge in very assessment of major values and norms across the world. And we compete with each other intensely, both in our neighborhood as well as across Africa and Southeast Asia for influence. So there is a rivalry, and yet what happens is we are economically entangled, deeply so. We are regionally codependent, and we are proudly seen together in BRICS. No, we stand there in BRICS, in SCO and beyond. India is very clear. Our task is not to contain China. That fantasy we leave to the United States of America. That is their fantasy. For us, our task is to constrain Chinese unilateralism, and also to make sure that it does not make the BRICS into a bulwark against the West. And that is where the role of a bridge comes in. Well, a bridge not to be an interlocutor or a gatekeeper, but a bridge to bring the global South and the West and China and Russia all together on the same page. So that is where India stands. That is where India's civilizational role is. So our task is, all of this. So, and to do that, what we really like to do is, we just don't want to bring the discontent of the global South to the table. Finally, sure. We also want to bring the fractured, broken, fragmented West onto the table and discuss their mutual issues between them.
Thank you. Arta, you mentioned that the US has no interest in the Middle East. There has been a dispute within the US whether US involvement in this war, the Israeli-Iranian war, is against the idea of the America First narrative. What do you think about that, very briefly?
I think, to me, there is no question that America has separate interests from the State of Israel. And that means that putting America first means putting America first. It doesn't mean to get dragged into another leader's wars, another statesman, another state's wars, which, whether or not it has justification or not, that's beside the point. To me, America has no actual interests, especially after the fact that we achieved energy autonomy. So our intervention in the Middle East is only a cause for concern. It can derail all of the domestic agenda that Donald Trump wants to do. It will completely hunker down America First. It's a cause for division. And it's another way for sort of new conservative elements and their projects to get back in. And that has been the theme. We have a number of presidents who come in promising change, and the people go with that change because maybe they're not geopolitical experts, but they feel in their bones that something is deeply wrong, and the world around them is changing, and so they want change. They want to be the focus of their government policies. And yet, when we get to the actual policy making, we find new arenas where there is escalation, there is war, there are cycles of war. I think that this administration has a golden chance to reshape the Middle East through diplomacy, through actively promoting and understanding the way that the new sort of fault lines in the Middle East are shaping, and and in fact the entire region, including Turkey and all the Arab countries which are U.S. allies, Turkey is a NATO ally, are very clear about what they want done in terms of U.S. presence in the Middle East, in terms of U.S. policy towards Iran and the nuclear issue. And yet, it's only one faction within the Trump administration, not all of the Trump administration, that's pushing a line toward that will lead us back to 2001 and 2003. And that is a regression, but this time, and I mentioned earlier, great powers do have leverage, do have leeway, do have time, but this time they won't have the time, because America is a highly, highly divided, polarized society today, and it has a lot of internal problems. We need to get our house in order. And the irony is, for all the talk about regime change around the world and liberty, and we are the forces of liberty, liberty abroad actually, ironically, destroys liberty at home. Look at what happened with the global war on terror and the freedoms that we lost as Americans in America, the civil freedoms, the surveillance system, so many other things. So. It is very important for this administration to walk back, and actually Donald Trump said that to Zelensky doesn't have all the cards, and it was very hard for America to actually bring Putin to the negotiating table because Putin is winning. But America can twist the arm of Israel and bring it back, because actually what happened is that Donald Trump wanted a negotiated solution to the Iran file, and then instead what we got was an active act of sabotage, which has been acknowledged as such by a U.S. ally to try to get and derail the program of this administration, which was about a new Middle East, in which you have even more, not even détente between the U.S. and Iran, but also a new architecture that allows for Iran, Turkey, and the Arab countries to coexist peacefully. So again, what I want to also mention very briefly is that we're not going to get answers to all these questions through multilateral formats or multilateral forums. We are seeing the way that diplomacy functions today is bilateral. Bilateral meeting with this country, bilateral meeting with that country, at best unilateralism. So our impression of and Iran and a lot of sort of non-Western countries make this kind of mistake as well. They have so much faith in this international order that was created in the international institutions. They're like, oh, like this has happened, we are going to convene the next UN Security Council meeting. All of that is irrelevant. What you need to understand is power dynamics, and one-to-one relations between the key powers in one region, and making rational, prudent decisions based on the facts on the ground, not based on ideology, not based on idealism, not based on some sort of apocalyptic future that some might desire.
Thank you. Sebastian, several experts, politicians argue that Europe cannot be a geopolitical actor if there is a veto power on behalf of the member states. What do you think about that? Can Europe be a geopolitical actor while even one member state can defer the common European foreign policy?
Well, I think it's really, really difficult, because the process and the origins of Europe were based on this kind of unanimity. So it's very difficult now to try to understand where Europe is going, because you can see different Europes, as I said before. And I think that everyone is regarding its own interest, which should be, for me, the minimum of any state or of any government. And that's the real problem, because some governments want to preserve and protect their habitants from the world or from Europe. So it depends if you regard institutions as a friend or as an enemy. But I think that now one of the most important is the way that Europe will deal its own relations with America, of course, the transatlantic relations, but the way that some member states will position connected to Donald Trump directly, or regarding Donald Trump as an enemy. And I think that it's the story of the chicken and the egg. Who started first to criticize the other? Because now in Europe, and not only my friend Ursula von der Leyen, as I already quoted her, but all these people from institutions who want to defy and who want to protect themselves from the state. But I think that Europe didn't understand something. I think that, and just one example, because we spoke about Donald Trump leaving the G7, but then after Donald Trump said that Emmanuel Macron, once again the same, the French president, didn't or never understand anything to anything. That was pretty funny because it's a real symbol of what Donald Trump thinks of Europe, because Macron is very weak in the country and tried to have a great relevant role on the international scale, which is not easy as well. But we can really understand the situation of the relation between Europe and America with this quotation. I think that Europe didn't understand something. This is a great opportunity for Europe to become independent and to play a great political role. But I think that Europeans dismiss this aspect and are probably not able to catch this opportunity because of the diversity, because of divisions, because of the necessity of sometimes unanimity for many decisions. So what is clear is that Donald Trump, like for the Middle East, for example, on your former question, Donald Trump doesn't have any interest in Europe. To be honest, we all know that he hates Europe, like Elon Musk. He hates this Europe, all this process of producing laws and legislation all the time, and for him it's a real problem. That's why he tried to punish, let's say, to punish us, because Europe starts to be a very difficult market to penetrate. Finally, I think that I would quote Rudyard Kipling, who was saying in one of these books, "You will become a man, my son." I think that now that the Godfather is saying to Europe, just deal with your own shit, sorry for the word, but that's the real word. Europe has now to become an adult, and I'm very scary about that, because we can catch the opportunity or we can probably step after step disappear. And the issue is really to understand and to hope that Europeans will really catch this opportunity to be stronger and stronger in this new international landscape. But I'm not very optimistic about that.
Finally, Victoria, very briefly, what do you think the BRICS' most important achievement will be in the coming 5 years? Just one thing, the most important one.
If I could briefly respond to your previous question, because, and this would be a question, why Europe needs or would want to be a single geopolitical actor. Is it in the interest of Europe? Is it in the interest of the countries of Europe? Would it benefit each of its peoples in different countries? I think, and what rings the bell with MAGA, make America first, or make India first, or make Russia first, is that you should, or a leader should be caring about the well-being of your own citizens. This is the primary idea. It seems that we're still living in this 19th century of Eurocentric world where Europe has to decide. We are already in 21st century. Europe no longer plays this role, but I totally agree. If Europe wants to stay as an actor, they have to start thinking about their own people. It's the most important goal that needs to be understood. As with BRICS, well, I think we're moving on, as we say, we are based on 3 pillars. It's not very often we are portrayed either as a challenger or alternatively as an economic and financial bloc. It's none of this. We are based or residing on 3 pillars: politics and governance, economics and finance, and humanitarian issues. So I think moving ahead with along all of those, be it NDB, be it common payment system, not currency. It's never been discussed seriously, and it's just a fantasy of some experts. Be it like a network university, be it a common scientific agricultural platform, energy platform. We're talking about climate, we're advancing slowly, but we are advancing. So I cannot name just one, but probably important thing would not be material. It is about BRICS adhering to its principles, that we are basing ourselves in, as I said, sovereignty, mutual respect, non-interference and non-crossing of the red lines, and consensus. So those are the main things. As soon as BRICS remains like this is the big achievement. Otherwise, we're moving, the trade is increasing, new projects are appearing. It's all very layered, multifaceted, and despite the fact that we're not an institution, it is a work, very intensive work on all levels. So I think this is the main thing. So we advance and we keep the way we are now. That would be good.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are short on time, and I do not want to abuse your coffee time. But if there's any question, I was told that 1 or 2 questions may fit. So I see those two. And shall we collect both questions and then
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Laura Marenbach. I'm an adjunct professor at the Technical University of Munich. I have 2 questions. The first one is for Dr. Panova. You spoke very optimistically about BRICS. I'm a big BRICS fan myself, so I appreciate that. But I also wanted to bring a bit of critical commentary. You talked about consensus, and what I was wondering is how can BRICS handle issues as their diversity increases? Do you feel like they're going to have to change the consensus decision-making, or will they have to accept less progress? Will it be enough not to have a material achievement? Is this sort of principled honesty, is it enough for the BRICS to really be a leader or a model for future governance? The second question is for Mr. Yoshi. I was wondering how you're going to get the, quote, broken West to the table, and where? Where should the BRICS, where should the countries of the Global South, where should they meet with the broken West, and how will you get them there? Certainly you can't call them the broken West or they won't come, right? So I just wondered your opinions on that.
there was the lady over there.
Great. Hello, Teresa Fallon, Center for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies. Thank you for such a thought-provoking panel. I have a question, though, Arta. You mentioned how this new generation of elites, we see that some of them were in the military, they're very disgruntled with their military experiences. That informs their views on geopolitics, but we know that the current international order, which everyone seems to agree is unraveling, but that was founded on the ashes of World War II, and everyone who contributed to the building of that was a veteran. Brezhnev, all the US presidents, they all had fought in the war. And so I wonder, without this horrendous experience that all these people went through and decided war is the last option, that we really have to work on institutions, and the EU, which I know everyone is very critical of, is one of those institutions created to try to prevent war. What will it take to build this new order without this horrific conflagration that actually built the current one? Thank you.
Thank you. And the last one in the second row. Last question.
Thanks.
Here.
Thank you. I must also echo the other wonderful panel. I'm Nandini Tandon, a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, and coming from a technology world, I wanted to ask Sanjay Joshi and the others, navigating the new multinodal maze, as Sanjay Joshi has pointed, how are you looking at deep tech, semiconductor, which is a horizontal rather than a vertical, being leveraged for a more harmonious, because it is going to be a very important platform, no matter which industry we look at. Can that be one that rallies and brings people together, or is it going to be a greater divide? Thank you.
Thank you. And given that we are out of time, I shall ask our panelists to answer the questions briefly. Thank you.
I'll just take the question that was addressed to me. Well, I would say that, first of all, this idea that the liberal international order, the post-war order, for all of its idealism of its founders, was a peaceful order, was a good order, was a stable order. I think that's a myth. I think this order has had a lot of problems within it. It has a lot of it has been very bloody for many people around the world. And now, when we are shifting away from it, moving away from idealism to understanding reality, understanding, for example, that sovereignty, cultural sovereignty matters, that states, big states, not all states are equal. Some states are bigger, they're more powerful, and they have real red lines and core interests. And for a peaceful world, you don't need UN security meetings. What you need is understanding, strategic empathy, of understanding that you can deal with your counterpart on their terms if you know what your red lines are and what their red line is. And that's a different kind of approach. It's a more realpolitik approach, but it allows for a kind of an informal concert, a concert of civilizations, a concert of powers. And that is not, that doesn't mean that war is always, I'm not a pacifist, I'm a realist. It doesn't mean that, we're going to always avoid all wars, but a lot of wars are unnecessary because they're fueled by over ideology, over politics. And those kinds of wars that are unnecessary. And yet a lot of idealism that's placed as a veneer, as a justification for these kinds of military interventions is the problem. So my position is, if we are coming back to reality, and if we actually have a radical realism that understands not just the material and physical conditions of war, but also the ontological, the psychological, the emotional facets of war, we can actually have that, we can move away from the kind of over-politicization, over-ideologization that promotes this Manichaean thinking, us versus them mentality, and then divides the world into certain blocks and then becomes unchanging. Permanent alliances, permanent friends, permanent enemies. Nothing about the world is permanent. Everything is always changing, and yet our illusion of permanence, because of World War II and its destruction, and because of our idealism in the aftermath of it, has been the cause for this. And we have had this order for many decades now, but it means that when it falls, it comes as more of a shock to us.
Victoria?
Well, the very short answer is no, we will not be going away from consensus-based model, but to make it a bit more kind of clear, easy decisions, when not everybody agrees, would be short-lived, that's for sure. That's number one. Number two, of course we're aware, but we're an inclusive club, we're not exclusive. It's not like you have to be part of some high top, very top leadership in order to join. But we did pause their exception of new members specifically for efficiency. Because, of course, we enlarge twice as much. It is more difficult, on the one hand, to take decisions, but on the other hand, we were not homogeneous from the very start. So each country was very strong with their own position, and this way we do not lose the culture of dialogue. This is something, when you're in their grouping with one hegemon, when everybody goes, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, it doesn't serve the purpose, because after a certain moment, you stop understanding others, stop understanding their interests, and it leads you to a total disaster. So this culture of dialogue is very necessary. The idea of consensus-based is the only viable option, but that is why we need to work, and we're working now. It's one of their priorities for Brazilian presidency currently, to work on a more efficient decision-making model where all the 10 countries plus Saudi Arabia plus 10 partner countries will be taken into account, but without slowing down the progress that we have on amount of issues. It's still work in progress. I can tell you that the easiest decisions that are pushed is a troika-like dialogue with the G20, but it's not workable, and it also excludes members. So if you have ideas, we would be happy if you share. Thank you.
Thank you. Sanjay?
A short answer to the two questions which you addressed to me. First of all, the question of Europe. And there are two parts of that question. The first part is, broken Europe, where should we meet? Now, we just had a conversation here and shows you, yes, it is possible to have these conversations in Budapest, in New Delhi, in places where it is easy to get all ideas on the table. Unfortunately, there are many capitals in Europe today where you cannot have these conversations. You are going to be cancelled. So first of all, I can then come to the second part. How do we get them together together? See, Western Europe needs to understand that the history of Europe, leave aside the last 80 years, has been war. It's been a broken Europe. Europe historically has been much like what West Asia looks today. And that's been through a large part of its history. 100 years wars, 30 years wars, and the wars have been prolonged. You end up with a frozen conflict today. And for the next 10 years, in Ukraine, you're back in the same situation. So let's start getting real about certain things. And that is when the conversations begin. Second question about technology, deep tech or whatever technology. See, technology is just a tool. There is no good or bad about technology. It is uses to which it is put and who puts it to what use. That is where the contests really are. So the answer to your question is not that simple. Thank you.
And I thank all the audience for attending this panel discussion and our panelists for attending the event. Thank you for being here and enjoy your coffee break. Thank you.
Many thanks to our distinguished panelists. Before our next panel, focused on the need for a West-South economic compact, we will have a half-hour coffee break in the hall right outside these doors. Before you go, don't forget to follow us on Instagram, X, LinkedIn to get updates on the event and keep track of the key takeaways from each session. You can share your thoughts and keep the conversation going using the Budapest Global Dialogue or BGD hashtags. Enjoy some coffee, tea, or a quick bite, and see you here in 30 minutes.